ரொம்ப தேங்க்ஸ்.
இந்த பாட்டுகள், ஜபங்கள், வேத வாசகங்கள் எல்லாம் ரொம்ப நல்லா செய்றீங்க தமிழ்ல. எனக்கு உங்க வகையில தமிழ்ல பேச முடியாது, ரொம்ப மன்னிச்சுக்கிடுங்க. அதனால இங்கிலீஷ்ல பேச போறேன். We serve a God of immense love. And to be really true to our God of love, it is that we serve a God of love who out of his love is serving us. So it's a God of service that we are familiar with. Last time we met, I talked about being in God's school. God's school, and what I shared with you was the first semester lesson that I learned. And I don't know if you remember, when I was sick and in the hospital, I couldn't do what I normally do. I usually end up with a pile of books in my bed when I am sick, and I read through. But this time it was different. I had no books. My eyes couldn't focus. I had no desire. My mind was not there half the time. But God came to me. He used the sky as his blackboard, and across the skies were the words, God is love. And I said to myself, oh, this is so basic, so fundamental. And but in my mind, I knew that God was teaching me something eternal, something tremendous that I had not really experienced truly, in order to say that God is a God of love. And over the next few weeks, I experienced his love in ways I had not experienced before. And I think I would do justice only by reading what Apostle Paul says of this love in Ephesians chapter 3. And I want to read the entire passage from verse 14, Ephesians 3:14, and I want to read to verse 20. For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory he may grant you to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. It is a God that's serving us. And to understand his love, to experience his love, is one way that we reciprocate the service. And he ends with a beautiful doxology here, perhaps one of the most beautiful doxologies in the Bible. Now, to him who is able to do far more abundantly, who is doing the serving? It is God doing the serving. Then all that we ask or think, according to the power at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. When we recognize that it is God that is serving us in ways great and small, every second of our lives, every beating of our heart, we would understand the God of love. So that was my first lesson. It was simple. God is love. On the sky as the blackboard, no book, no pen. And he has continued to bless me. And now I have lesson 2, semester 2 to share with you. He's not left me alone, and he's been constantly with me. And I have to say, with Ephesians 3:20, it's far more abundantly than I can think or imagine. In May of this year, a group of us went to the Holy Land. And initially, I had planned to go to the Holy Land and purchase tickets for my entire family in 2020. And that's what the year of the height of the pandemic, so we couldn't do it. And now Dharmasili knew, my wife knew that I wanted to go to the Holy Land. So she arranged it again. But this time, though my mind was there, my body just couldn't handle it. I was very reluctant. When you go with the tour group, it's very strenuous. You have to get up in the morning at a certain time, eat your breakfast, and load everything in the car bus, get off at a certain time, walk, and then that night unload everything and then go get into a hotel. Next morning, get up. My routine was quite changed. Now when I do work, I work only half a day. Then in the afternoon, I go home and rest before I can do anything. I can't even think in the evening. So this was getting to me by day 3, day 4. I said, boy, I'm not enjoying this trip. We went to Nazareth. I was born in Nazareth, Tirunelveli district. I was so happy to see Nazareth, where Christ grew up. We went to Mount Pisgah, where Moses died. So all the Moses, there were 11 of us. We stood and took a picture in a memorial to Moses the death. And from Mount Pisgah, you can see across the valley, Jordan Valley, Canaan. And we saw what Moses saw. But I really couldn't get into the Holy Land experience. We went to the Beatitudes. That's one of my favorite passages, the Mount of Blessing sermon, Mount Capernaum, the synagogue. By the time we went to Christ's tomb, I was done. So the group, there were thousands of people, and you had to, the lines were kind of trimmed to the point where finally only one person can go where Christ's tomb was, and the lines were like 3 hours long. So I said, all of you go, I'm not going to go in there. I sat out. And this is how it was. Some tours I would go, get out the bus, find a shady place and sit. And there was a time when I thought, I may not be able to get back to the US. And one day even I had a dream that I was hospitalized in Tel Aviv in ICU. And and the rest of the group left me and went. So, it was, I had to keep going. And to the best of my ability, I was trying to think what God was trying to teach me during this experience. And this was until the next to the last day. We came to Mount Sinai, and to go to the foot of the mountain, there is actually a monastery called St. Catherine's Monastery. And actually, I didn't read about it before I went. But after I came back, I took some time to read about St. Catherine's Monastery. It's the oldest continuous monastery in the world. And it is also one of the few oldest libraries in the world. It has got Codex Sinaiticus, and a lot of researchers go there just to go through the books that are in that library. And to go there, you had to walk maybe like a mile, slow grade uphill. And I couldn't do it. So I got into a taxi and went to the foot of the mountain. And Dharmasili and others walked, my grandchildren. And when I went there, there were thousands of people milling around. And the monastery was there, and the background was Mount Horeb, where Moses received the 10 Commandments. And as people are, actually, you had to go into a monastery to see Moses' burning bush, or at least a bush that Moses most likely saw burning. And there are vendors selling stones, and they would hold up a stone with the fern in it, like a petrified stone. And so there was one guy who was trying to sell this to me. So I looked over, and there was some other stone that looked like flaming red color. And I was just looking. I wasn't interested in buying anything. During this time, by the way, I was looking around, and it's barren. Mount Sinai is barren. If there was grass, you couldn't see it. There are a few bushes. But I said to myself, why would God bring these people here? How many? There are 6,000 men, if you read in Exodus. 6,000 men, and there are women, there are children, there is a group that came out of Egyptians and cattle. So the crowd, God brought them to this wilderness. Sun is shining bright on everybody. I'm sure there are marauders, and anytime you see these vultures and wolves and scavenging animals, they go look for the weakest ones. And so I'm sure there are stragglers, but why would he bring? And then I said to myself, from the knowledge that I knew, that God said, I'm going to be the cloud in the day, I'm going to be the cloud of fire at night to protect you. I'll give you water out of the rock. These are all scriptures you can read. And I'll give you manna from heaven. In fact, manna was given 40 years. And so I said to myself, this is the reason why God brought them here, because he is going to be meeting all their needs, right? If he can do food, shelter, shoes didn't wear out for 40 years, water. So I said to myself, God needed to teach the children of Israel that is all sufficient. He'll take care of all their needs. And he wanted to teach them for 40 years. And so I felt very satisfied. It sounded like a good explanation why God would bring them here. Then, with this thought in mind, I was getting ready to go in when out of the corner of the eye, I saw a blue stone. And just like a flash, several years earlier, one of my relatives had shared with me a sermon under the title of The Blue Stone. And just like a flash, I knew why I had come. And the sermon was by Pastor Mike Oxytenko. And I'll just briefly, without going into the references in Exodus chapter 24, where Moses is invited by God with 70 of the elders, along with Nadab and Abihu, and you know the story of those people later on. But he took them to the foot of the mountain, and then after that, Moses and Joshua went up to God's presence. But Moses saw God on the throne, and the base of the throne was a sapphire or a blue stone. Sapphire, blue stone. And then later on in Exodus, when the 10 Commandments are given, and this is where Pastor Mike Oxytenko makes a distinction. In every translation I have read, God gave Moses the tablets of stone. That's what it says, tablets of stone. But I agree with Pastor Oxytenko. The Hebrew, the articles are not there very clearly, but they do marks. It clearly says of the stone. So Pastor Oxytenko's contention is that the blue stone that is mentioned, from which the 10 Commandments are hewn out, were from the bottom of God's throne itself. And with that thought in mind, I said I'm going to buy a few blue stones. I hope you can see. This is from Mount Horeb. And I like to think this was part of God's throne base. But this is not the important thing. What I said to myself, just like God took care of the Egyptian, the Canaan, the Israelites for 40 years, meeting all the needs, God is taking care of my need. I'm just one in a million people who walk through that place. But he had something precious for me. I was more than a million to recognize a blessing, ordinary stone. But for me, it's it's not ordinary. So, God is a God of promise. He takes us through various experiences. But if we have ears to hear and eyes to see, we would see his glory in our lives. It's going to be very specific for us. It's not going to be the same for anybody. I'm sure there are millions of people who go to Holy Land, they come up with beautiful lessons. For me, God designed a very special lesson. Then, I was happy to land back in LA and come home. And God had not finished with me on this trip yet. During the Sabbath school lesson, it was on Ephesians last quarter. And one of the lessons I was studying, it referred to chapter 20 of Ezekiel. And at once, just like the blue stone kind of flashed in my mind, the Ten Commandments flashed in my mind, Ezekiel chapter 20. In this chapter, there is a summary of God's election of Israelites and him bringing them out of Canaan, Egypt, and in the wilderness, and then on the way to Canaan. So it's kind of a historical summary done by Ezekiel. And Ezekiel is a prophet who is now in Babylon in captivity. Ezekiel was like Daniel. He was worried that the children of Israel are going to be in captivity for a long time. So, but God showed him certain things. And here, after God brought them out of Egypt to the wilderness, and this is what surprised me. I thought he brought them to show them that he's sufficient. But here is something very important. Verse 10, Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 10. So I led them out of the land of Egypt and brought them into the wilderness. I gave them my statutes and made known to them my rules, by which if a person does them, he shall live. Moreover, I gave them my Sabbaths as a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am the Lord that sanctifies them. You think about the Sabbath. The manna came 6 days. Seventh day, there was no manna. And God did a miracle on the sixth day. Normally, the manna would have been spoiled the next day. But whether they collected enough or not, it was enough for them on Sabbath. And then on Sunday and onwards, it fell. For 40 years, God put a sign that he is a God who is going to provide. And the Sabbath was that sign. The Sabbath is the one that says he's the rock. Sabbath is the one that shows that God is the light, that he's the shade, he's the shelter. It is a Sabbath that says that he is the creator God. And the magic never ended of manna for 40 years. So to me, at least to me, it seems like God wanted to show the children that the Sabbath is the true sign that we serve a creator God, a living God, a sign that is as eternal as God himself. Now, I am from Prakasapuram, and I think those of you who know the history is, the Sabbath truth came in the late 1800s, I think, middle 1800s. And so we have a way of keeping the Sabbath. And it's been our custom that when somebody they're planning to marry somebody in the Adventist church, they take some lessons and then they get baptized. So we had a family member like that who got baptized. And then, she was very sincere. One day she asked me, how do you keep the Sabbath? And so I didn't have a good answer to her at that time. But since then, I have spent some time just thinking about how God would want me to sanctify his Sabbath. Is there anything we can do to sanctify the Sabbath? Really not. So God helped me understand what he wants us to do to keep the Sabbath holy. And so I am, it's a foundational fact that Sabbath is binding on us. The 24 hours of the Sabbath are binding on us. So I have a 4-part answer to this question. How do you keep the Sabbath? Number one, the 24 hours of the Sabbath are not ours. You can read the Bible from beginning to the end. Even in Exodus, there are 6 places it says, my Sabbath. Ezekiel 20, it says, my Sabbath. Then in Mark 2:20, where Christ says, the Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath. So the seventh day does not belong to man. He gave it to man, but with a certain understanding. And to me, the Sabbath is like the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. What was so special about the tree? Could they eat the fruit of the tree? They could. Could we work on Sabbath, do whatever we... Yeah, there is no distinction. Only the distinction was God said don't, and that is a distinction. So just like he kept the tree of the Garden of Eden, good and evil, for himself, as the authority, as the sovereign God, to show man that man has to live by God, not by himself. The Sabbath is such a tree of the knowledge of good and evil in our days. So what do we do? How do we keep the Sabbath? Acknowledge that it's not ours. It's God's. He says, it's my holy day, so give it back to him. So on Friday evening, my practice is to pray, started with a meditation. Say, God, these 24 hours, the devil is trying to grab minutes, hours from here. I'm going to give it to you. You dwell in me and guide my thoughts, my actions, my words, my feet. So acknowledge that it is God's. So that's what I have begun to do. So the first thing is acknowledge that it's God's, not mine. Secondly, Jesus is the model. He said, I came to fulfill, not to take away anything. So Jesus is our model on how to keep the Sabbath. It is not a lot of don't. God came to give us life, an abundant life. And, as beautifully read in Isaiah 58, it is supposed to be a day of delight where we enjoy fellowship with God. So it's not a day of don't, but spending time with Jesus. So Jesus is the model. How did Jesus spend the Sabbath? In private devotion, and it is a model for us. He said he did everything so he can give us a model, right? Baptism too. So we have time, and when we give this day back to him, we don't have work appointments. We have no other obligations, no classes, no training. So we say, by the way, I had to mention that I had to certify in California, if you are taking care of long-term facilities, you had to be certified as a medical director. And I was avoiding doing that because you have to go through 3 different sessions. One is many hours of study on the internet, and then you had to spend 3 days in a group with a group of people in person, and then another few things of attending sessions somewhere else. But the 3 days starts on a Friday and ends on a Sunday, and the middle is Sabbath. And so I kept putting it off, but California's, our deadline is coming. So when I signed up, I told them, I really can't attend on Sabbath, on Saturday. They said, oh, you really don't need to do any work. Just sit, come and sit. You don't need to take notes. So I said, no, I can't do that. Then they said, maybe you can join via Zoom. Just put the Zoom on, you're attending. And I said, no, I can't do it. And they said, then, sorry, then we have to refund your money. So I said, okay, but I don't want a refund. So I kept praying about it. I asked a group of people to pray about it. And eventually I landed on a Friday morning at the site where I was, Austin, Texas. So as I registered, I asked, whom could I talk to? I have a problem. And they said, oh, this is a lady that you need to talk to. So they gave me a number. I called her. She was in Washington, D.C. And her secretary said, she's busy the whole day. She'll call you tonight. So I said, okay. So I went to the session. And during the session, I got a call from this lady. So I told her, if I don't do this, I know I won't be certified. But I can't come on Saturday. It's non-negotiable. And to my surprise, she said, we have had such requests before. We know how to handle it. Don't worry, you don't need to come. Talk to your group leader. So, I was blessed, and I did not know. The next day when I went, my group, they had us in small groups of 6 to 7 people. They were surprised that I was excused. And I still haven't gotten the certification because I got it to the third part. So that is pending. What I'm saying is that God honors. He has not given us a choice when it comes to the Sabbath. We have to stand firm because we acknowledge God as a creator. And he said, this day is mine to do as I please, not do your own thing. And God blesses us. So number 1, give it back to God. Number 2, do as Jesus did. Spend the time in study and prayer. And the third thing is, as his custom was, he went into the synagogue. Corporate worship, private worship, corporate worship. So I took a taxi and went to one of the churches there and spent the day. And that was also amazing. Amazing. That day they said, well, today is men's chorus. Men are going to sing. And all the men are going to come to the front and sing. So I sang in the choir in the church. And I found a lady who has a passion for working with the homeless. So I had a chance to interact with them. So it was a blessed day. So congregational worship next. Then finally, the portion that was read from Matthew chapter 12. It was his custom in the afternoon, after the private worship and corporate worship, to go and do good. The day is not given for us to do what we want, but the day is given for us so we can do what others need done that they can't do it for themselves. Find the fatherless, the homeless, the widowed. Spend the afternoon serving those people, because in serving those people, you serve God. And I don't have the quotation with me, but Mrs. White says very clearly, when you go into service people that cannot help themselves, you're actually walking in the footsteps of Jesus. You don't need to go walk the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem. You are doing that when you are meeting the needs of people. So the rest of the afternoon is not for me, but for serving others. This is Jesus' model. So if you do that, nobody can say, don't do that, don't do that. You know how we bring up our children with so many don't, and make this such a burden? But God has not given us anything to take away our freedom, our liberty, nothing to minimize our joy, our blessings. So every minute we spend in giving it back to God, He's going to double it up, quadruple it up, and we are going to end up with more than we can manage. This morning, God blessed me again in a tremendous way. How much time do we have? Anybody have a... okay, I still have a few minutes, right? So, even when I go to churches, Adventist churches, I go to... I'm actually in the Methodist church, in one of the youth room in a Methodist church. My granddaughter came and wrote "Happy Sabbath" here. You can see it. And so I am in a Methodist church, and we had children's Sabbath school for the first time in our small group. We are a small group, and so adults normally get together. The children all go to the wonderful churches here, University Church and other churches. So we prayed about it. We said we are going to start a children's Sabbath school, and so I talked to one couple, young couple. They have two children, and the ages are 14 and 12. So I said, "Can I teach your children? Take the Sabbath school for your children?" They said, "But we are doing this, we are doing that, so many." But I said, "I want to focus on," because the parents belong to a group. So they said, "Okay." And so I had prepared to teach these two kids. We're going to start with the two kids and see what happens. But lo and behold, they were coming from quite far. So they had a delay in coming. But in walks my 20-year-old granddaughter, Claire. And then walks my 16-year-old granddaughter, Jasmine, walks in. So they are the first two kids in my Sabbath school. I said, "Lord, this is wonderful, because this is what I've been imagining in my own mind." If you read Deuteronomy 6, Deuteronomy 6 is beautiful. That is where you have, the Lord, God is one. And then it goes on to say, you better tell your experience to your children, to your children's children, write them on the walls, at the doors, talk while sitting, talk while walking, talk while sleeping. I said, this is what I want to do. And actually, that is the way to teach our children the scriptures. There is some good to go into the church and other places, but it is parents teaching the children, grandparents teaching the grandchildren. So I was blessed when they came. And eventually, I had planned for two. There are 6 children. And we had a wonderful, very first Sabbath school in a Methodist church. And how God blesses. When God blesses, He does not hold anything. So I was told, since they don't have any children, all the children's rooms are available to us. We can do what we want in these rooms. We can put posters and bill out, and it is ours. So God has blessed us abundantly. So I want to conclude with this. We have a God of love that meets our needs very specifically, just what we need at the right time. It may not come when we want it, but it comes when God wants it. And when it comes, you can't hold it. It's an abundant. That is why in Isaiah 58 it says, "You'll walk in the heights of this earth, and will be in His protection." So I want to commend the Sabbath to you. It is not an ordinary day. It's not like any other day. It's a special day. God has given it to us to fill us with the blessings that the world cannot give us. And I used to have a wonderful friend who passed away, Dr. Samuel from Nazareth, and the compounders. And we used to discuss very often. We used to say, unless you step on the water, get out of the boat, you can't walk on water. So there is something that we have to experience, taste and see. The Lord is good, and it is His love is everlasting, and we cannot understand it. May God bless us as we experience His love in our own ways and dedicate ourselves to Him, and may our lives glorify Him. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my second semester with God.